I always knew my parents favored my younger sister Emma, but I never imagined they would book a 2-week European vacation for just the three of them, while I found out through Emma's Instagram stories. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals come wrapped in glossy travel photos and carefree smiles that deliberately exclude you from the family you thought you belonged to. What I discovered next didn't just expose their lies, it gave me the power to change everything forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The first photo appeared on my Instagram feed at 7:42 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in June. Emma, radiant in a flowing sundress, stood in front of the Eiffel Tower with our parents flanking her on either side. All three wore matching smiles and designer, sunglasses that caught the Parisian morning light perfectly. The caption read, "Living our best life in the city of light. Family vacation dreams coming true. Paris vibes. Family time. Blessed." I stared at my phone screen, certain I was misunderstanding something fundamental. The coffee mug in my hands grew cold as I scrolled through the comments from relatives and family friends, all expressing excitement and envy at what appeared to be a spontaneous European adventure. My cousin Melissa had written, "So jealous. Wish my parents would surprise me with Paris." Our family friend Janet commented, "The Thompson family knows how to live, have the best time." The Thompson family, that was supposed to include me. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter of my studio apartment, the screen still glowing with evidence of my exclusion. My name is Rachel Thompson, and at 26, I had grown accustomed to being the overlooked daughter, the one who chose a practical career in accounting over Emma's glamorous pursuit of fashion design, the one who lived modestly while saving for my future instead of relying on parental support. But this felt different. This wasn't about favoritism or differing life choices. This was about being erased from the family narrative entirely. My hands trembled slightly as I called my mother's cell phone, hoping desperately for a reasonable explanation. Perhaps this was some kind of mistake, a last-minute trip where they couldn't reach me, an emergency that required immediate travel. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail, her cheerful voice informing me that she was currently living her best life and unavailable for calls. I tried my father next, then Emma. Both phones went straight to voicemail with similar messages about being on vacation and out of reach. The systematic nature of their unavailability suggested this wasn't an oversight or emergency. This was intentional. Over the next hour, more photos appeared across their social media accounts. Dad looking distinguished outside the Louvre, his salt and pepper beard neatly trimmed and his polo shirt obviously new. Mom elegant in a cafe somewhere along the Champs-Élysées, her blonde hair styled perfectly despite the supposed spontaneity of the trip. Emma posing dramatically on a bridge over the Seine, her artistic flair evident in every carefully composed shot. Each image felt like a small knife twisting in my chest. Not just because I was absent, but because of how deliberate that absence appeared to be. These weren't the awkward selfies of inexperienced travelers or the hurried snapshots of a last-minute getaway. These were the polished photographs of a planned vacation, complete with coordinated outfits and professional quality lighting that suggested they had taken their time preparing for this trip. I called my grandmother, hoping she might have some insight into this unexpected family vacation. Grandma Rose had always been the family's central information hub, the person everyone confided in when they needed advice or simply wanted someone to listen. "Oh, honey," she said when I explained why I was calling, her voice carrying a mixture of sympathy and something else I couldn't quite identify. "I was wondering when you'd find out about that." "You knew?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Your mother mentioned they were planning something special for Emma's graduation, but I assumed you'd be included. When she said it was just the three of them, I asked about you specifically." Grandma Rose paused, and I could hear her choosing her words carefully. She said you were too busy with work to join them, that you declined the invitation. The lie hit me like a physical blow. Not only had they planned this trip without me, but they had created a story to explain my absence that painted me as the one who chose not to participate. According to their version of events, I was the daughter too focused on her career to prioritize family time, too rigid in my schedule to embrace spontaneous adventure. I was never invited, Grandma, I said quietly. I found out through Emma's Instagram this morning. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds before Grandma Rose spoke again, her voice tight with what I recognized as carefully controlled anger. That is not acceptable, Rachel. Not acceptable at all. I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on my work at Mitchell & Associates, the mid-sized accounting firm where I'd been employed for the past 4 years. My colleagues noticed my distraction during our morning team meeting, and my supervisor, Linda, asked twice if I was feeling well. I deflected their concern with vague mentions of family complications, unwilling to admit the full extent of my humiliation. Throughout the day, the photos continued to appear with relentless regularity. Lunch at a sidewalk bistro, shopping along the Rue de Rivoli, sunset views from Montmartre. Each post accumulated dozens of likes and comments from people who knew me, people who had to be wondering why I wasn't part of this family celebration. Yet, no one asked directly, perhaps sensing the awkwardness of the situation, or simply assuming there was some reasonable explanation they weren't privy to. By evening, I had developed a strategy for processing what felt like an ongoing emotional assault. I would allow myself to check their social media once every 2 hours, absorbing whatever new content had appeared, then deliberately focus on other activities for the remainder of each interval. It was a system designed to minimize damage while acknowledging that I couldn't simply ignore what was happening. That night, I sat in my small but comfortable apartment, surrounded by the life I had built through my own efforts. The furniture was mostly secondhand but carefully chosen, the decorations reflecting my personal taste rather than the latest trends. My bookshelf contained novels and professional development texts, evidence of both my practical nature and my desire for continuous learning. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The kitchen, though tiny, was well organized and functional, equipped with everything I needed to prepare the simple but nutritious meals I preferred. This apartment represented independence and self-sufficiency, values I had developed partly in response to Emma's continued reliance on parental support. While she moved between expensive apartments funded by Dad's generous monthly allowances, I had chosen to build financial security through careful budgeting and consistent saving. My emergency fund could cover 6 months of expenses. My retirement contributions exceeded my employer's matching program, and I had even begun setting aside money for a future house down payment. Yet sitting alone in this testament to my responsible choices, I felt profoundly isolated. All my practical decisions, all my careful planning, all my efforts to be the reliable daughter who didn't require constant financial assistance had somehow resulted in being excluded from my own family's most significant shared experience in years. I opened my laptop and began researching the trip they were taking, curious about the logistics and cost of their European adventure. The hotel they were staying at, based on the location tags in their photos, was the Hotel Plaza Athénée, a luxury establishment where rooms started at €800 per night. The restaurants they had posted about were similarly expensive, the kind of places where dinner for 3 could easily cost several $100s. As I calculated the potential cost of their trip, a figure began to emerge that made me increasingly uncomfortable. 2 weeks in Paris at a luxury hotel with shopping, dining, and tourist activities would likely cost between $15,000 and $20,000. This wasn't the modest vacation budget of a middle-class family treating themselves to a special celebration. This was the spending pattern of people with either significant disposable income or a willingness to take on substantial debt for the sake of appearances. My parents had always been somewhat secretive about their finances, deflecting questions about money with vague reassurances that everything was fine and that I shouldn't worry about such matters. They lived in the same house they had purchased 20 years ago, drove cars that were a few years old but well-maintained, and generally appeared to maintain a comfortable middle-class lifestyle without obvious extravagance. But Emma's lifestyle suggested access to resources that seemed inconsistent with Dad's position as a regional sales manager and Mom's part-time work as a dental hygienist. Emma's apartment in the trendy arts district rented for $3,000 per month. A figure I knew because I had helped her research options when she first moved out of the family home 2 years ago. Her wardrobe consisted primarily of designer pieces. Her social media featured regular dining experiences at expensive restaurants, and she drove a BMW that was replaced every 2 years with a newer model. When I had asked Emma directly how she managed such expenses on her irregular income from freelance fashion consulting, she had laughed and said our parents were just generous, and that I could have the same support if I weren't so stubbornly independent. At the time, I had assumed she was exaggerating, that perhaps our parents helped with occasional expenses, but that Emma's lifestyle was primarily funded through her own work. The European vacation photos suggested otherwise. This level of spending implied either hidden financial resources or a concerning willingness to prioritize immediate gratification over long-term financial stability. Either possibility raised questions about why I had been excluded from not just the trip itself, but from the family discussions about finances that must have preceded such a significant expenditure. I spent the evening researching the various locations they visited, trying to understand the scope of their activities. They had purchased tickets for a private evening tour of the Louvre, an experience that cost several $100s per person. They had dined at Le Meurice, a Michelin-starred restaurant where the tasting menu alone cost nearly €400 per person before wine. Emma had posted photos of shopping bags from luxury boutiques along the Avenue Montaigne, the kind of stores where a single handbag could cost more than my monthly rent. Each discovery deepened my sense of bewilderment and hurt. This wasn't a family vacation in any sense I understood the term. This was an expensive luxury experience shared exclusively between my parents and my sister, funded by resources I had never known existed and planned without any consideration for my inclusion. The next morning brought fresh photos from their second day in Paris, along with the first direct communication I had received since discovering their trip. Emma had sent me a text message at 3 a.m. local time, which would have been mid-afternoon in Paris. "Hey Rach, saw you liked our pics. Wish you could be here, but we know how busy you are with work stuff. Maybe next time. Love you." The casual tone of the message, with its implication that my absence was somehow my own choice, felt like salt in an already painful wound. Emma's suggestion that I might join them next time assumed there would be future family vacations of similar scope and expense, trips that would apparently continue to be planned without my input or knowledge. I stared at the message for several minutes before deciding not to respond immediately. Any reply I composed in my current emotional state would likely be either unnecessarily harsh or embarrassingly vulnerable. Instead, I decided to focus on understanding the financial dynamics that had made this trip possible, hoping that practical investigation might provide clarity about my family's behavior. That evening, I called my parents' house, knowing they wouldn't answer but wanting to leave a message that established my awareness of the situation. Their home answering machine, which they had maintained despite both having cell phones, picked up after 4 rings. "Hi, Mom and Dad," I said after the beep, keeping my voice steady and professional. "I saw the photos from your Paris trip. It looks like you're having a wonderful time. I'm curious about when this vacation was planned and why I wasn't included in the family discussion about it. I'd appreciate a call when you have a chance to explain the situation. I hope you're safe and enjoying yourselves." The message felt appropriately neutral, expressing concern for their well-being while making clear that I was aware of my exclusion and expected an explanation. I hoped it would prompt a conversation that might resolve what I still wanted to believe was some kind of misunderstanding. Over the following days, their European adventure continued to unfold across social media with disturbing regularity. They traveled from Paris to Rome, staying at another luxury hotel near the Spanish Steps. They took a private cooking class in Tuscany, toured the Vatican with a personal guide, and dined at restaurants that required reservations months in advance. Each experience appeared more expensive than the last, suggesting a trip budget that far exceeded anything I had imagined my family could afford. My coworkers began commenting on my obvious distraction, and Linda finally asked me directly if everything was okay at home. I found myself in the uncomfortable position of explaining that my family was on vacation without me, a situation that prompted awkward expressions of sympathy and confusion. Several colleagues shared stories of their own family complications, trying to normalize my experience, but their efforts only highlighted how unusual my situation actually was. Family dynamics can be really complicated, Linda offered after I had provided a carefully edited version of recent events. Sometimes people make decisions that don't make sense from the outside. I'm sure there's more to the story than what appears on social media. Her attempt at comfort was well-intentioned, but it missed the fundamental issue. This wasn't about complicated family dynamics or misunderstandings that could be resolved through better communication. This was about being deliberately excluded from a significant family experience, then having that exclusion disguised as my own choice to prioritize work over family time. As their trip entered its second week, I began researching European vacation costs more systematically, trying to understand the full financial scope of what my parents had undertaken. Hotel costs, restaurant expenses, shopping, tours, transportation between cities, and flights for 3 people would likely total between $25,000 and $30,000. This wasn't an amount that could be casually spent without careful planning and significant financial resources. My parents' known income sources didn't seem adequate for this level of discretionary spending. Dad's position as a regional sales manager for a paper products company provided a solid middle-class income, but not one that would typically support luxury European vacations. Mom's part-time work at the dental office contributed modestly to their household budget, but hardly enough to fund elaborate international travel. The disconnect between their apparent financial resources and their known income sources began to trouble me in ways that extended beyond my hurt feelings about being excluded from their vacation. If they had access to money I wasn't aware of, what other financial information had they kept from me? And if they didn't have adequate resources for this level of spending, what kind of financial risk were they taking for the sake of treating Emma to an expensive European adventure? I decided to call Grandma Rose again, hoping she might have additional insight into my parents' financial situation or their reasoning for excluding me from this trip. Her perspective as someone who had known them longer and maintained close relationships with both of her children might provide clarity I couldn't achieve on my own. "I've been thinking about our conversation," she said after I explained my continued confusion about the situation. "And I've been wondering about some things myself. Your mother has always been private about money matters, but some of the things Emma has been posting suggest spending that seems inconsistent with what I know about their income." "What do you mean?" I asked, encouraged by her willingness to discuss what felt like a sensitive topic. "Well, Emma's apartment costs more than what your father makes in a month, yet your parents seem to be covering all her expenses while also funding trips like this one. Either they've come into money I don't know about, or they're making financial decisions that concern me." Grandma Rose's observation aligned with my own calculations and suspicions. Emma's lifestyle, combined with expensive family vacations, suggested either hidden financial resources or unsustainable spending patterns. Neither possibility explained why I had been excluded from family financial discussions or why my parents had chosen to invest so heavily in Emma's experiences while maintaining distance from my more modest lifestyle. "Have you ever asked them directly about their finances?" I wondered aloud. "Your mother gets defensive when I bring up money. Grandma Rose admitted. She changes the subject or implies that I'm being nosy. But as someone who lived through the Depression and learned the importance of financial responsibility, I worry about debt and spending beyond one's means. Her concern resonated with my own professional understanding of personal finance. As an accountant, I regularly helped clients develop budgets and understand the long-term consequences of various spending decisions. The pattern I was observing in my family's behavior suggested either a level of wealth they had never disclosed or a willingness to take on significant debt for the sake of maintaining appearances and funding Emma's lifestyle. That weekend, while my family continued posting photos from the Italian Riviera, I decided to conduct some research that might provide insight into their actual financial situation. As their daughter, I had access to certain information that might help me understand the source of their apparent wealth. I knew the approximate value of their home, their car payments, and their general lifestyle expenses. What I didn't understand was how these known factors aligned with their recent spending patterns. I began by researching property records for their house, information that was publicly available through the county assessor's office. The house they had purchased 20 years ago for $140,000 was now valued at approximately $350,000, a significant appreciation that had built substantial equity over time. However, this equity would only be accessible through selling the house or taking out additional loans against its value. Next, I looked into Dad's employer, the paper products company where he had worked for the past 15 years. The company was publicly traded, which meant salary information for executives was available through SEC filings. Dad's position as a regional sales manager wouldn't be included in these executive compensation reports, but I could get a sense of the company's financial health and typical compensation ranges for management positions. What I discovered suggested that Dad's income was likely in the range I had always assumed, somewhere between $70,000 and $90,000 annually. Combined with Mom's part-time income, their household earnings would be sufficient for comfortable middle-class living, but not for the level of discretionary spending I was observing. This left me with two primary possibilities. Either my parents had access to additional income sources I wasn't aware of, such as investments or inheritances, or they were funding their current lifestyle through debt, possibly including home, equity loans, or credit cards. Both scenarios raised questions about why they had never discussed their financial situation with me, particularly given my professional expertise in financial planning and budgeting. As an accountant, I had helped many clients navigate complex financial situations, from managing debt consolidation to planning for retirement. I understood the importance of transparent communication about money within families, especially when adult children might eventually inherit both assets and liabilities from their parents. My exclusion from financial discussions, combined with my exclusion from expensive family activities, suggested a pattern of treating me as an outsider to family decision-making processes. The photos from their final days in Europe showed no signs of concern about expense or budget limitations. They hired a private driver for a day trip through the Tuscan countryside, stayed in a villa that appeared to cost several $1,000s per night, and continued dining at restaurants where single meals likely cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Emma's shopping continued as well, with photos of bags from luxury boutiques in Florence and Rome that suggested thousands of dollars in additional purchases. On their last night in Europe, Emma posted a lengthy Instagram caption that particularly troubled me. "This has been the most amazing trip of my entire life. So grateful to have parents who believe in creating magical experiences and memories that will last forever." Family adventures like this remind me how important it is to prioritize the people you love and the moments that truly matter. Already planning our next international adventure. The post received dozens of comments from friends and relatives praising my parents' generosity and expressing envy at Emma's good fortune. Several people specifically commented on how lucky Emma was to have such supportive parents, how wonderful it was that they prioritized family experiences over material possessions. Reading these responses, I realized that my family's narrative about this trip had been carefully constructed to present them as thoughtful parents who valued experiences and family bonding. Yet I knew that this narrative was incomplete at best, misleading at worst. This wasn't a story about parents who valued family experiences. It was about parents who valued one daughter's experiences while excluding the other daughter entirely. The careful curation of their social media posts had created a public image that concealed the fundamental inequality in how they treated their two adult children. That night, I lay awake thinking about the broader implications of what I had observed over the past 2 weeks. This wasn't just about missing a vacation or feeling excluded from family activities. This was about a systematic pattern of treating me as somehow separate from the core family unit, less deserving of financial investment, less worthy of consideration in major family decisions. Over the years, I had attributed the differences in how my parents treated Emma and me to our different life choices and personalities. Emma was more social, more artistic, more willing to ask for help when she needed it. I was more independent, more practical, more focused on building self-sufficiency. These differences had seemed to explain why Emma received more financial support and attention from our parents. But the European vacation revealed something beyond simple personality-based favoritism. This was about my parents choosing to invest significant financial resources in creating experiences and memories with Emma, while deliberately excluding me from those same opportunities. They hadn't invited me and allowed me to decline. They hadn't discussed the trip with me and discovered I couldn't participate due to work obligations. They had planned an expensive family vacation for 3 people when their family included 4 people, then created a false narrative to explain my absence. This realization forced me to reconsider many other family interactions over the years. How many other decisions had been made without my input? How many other financial discussions had occurred without my knowledge? How many other experiences had been planned and executed with the assumption that I either wouldn't be interested or wouldn't be included? I thought about family holidays, where I was expected to contribute equally to gift expenses and meal preparation, while Emma's contributions were consistently smaller or non-existent. I remembered family dinners where conversations focused on Emma's latest projects, travels, and social activities, while my professional achievements and personal interests received minimal attention. I recalled numerous occasions when my parents had made financial commitments on Emma's behalf without consulting me about similar support, despite my being the older daughter and having greater financial knowledge. The pattern was clear once. I allowed myself to see it without the filter of wanting to believe in equal family treatment. For years, I had been classified as the responsible daughter who didn't need the same level of attention and support as Emma, who was seen as more fragile, more artistic, more deserving of special consideration. This classification had resulted in my being excluded from family financial resources, family experiences, and family decision-making processes. Yet despite this exclusion, I was still expected to participate in family obligations. I was expected to attend family gatherings, contribute to family celebrations, and maintain relationships with parents who clearly prioritized their other daughter's happiness over my inclusion in family life. The asymmetry was stunning once I acknowledged it directly. As their plane landed back in the United States and their social media posts shifted from European adventures to homecoming gratitude, I realized that I faced a choice about how to respond to this situation. I could continue accepting my role as the excluded daughter, maintaining family peace by pretending that my feelings didn't matter and that their behavior was acceptable. Or I could find a way to establish boundaries that reflected my actual worth and demanded the respect I deserved as an equal member of the family. The decision felt overwhelming in its implications. Challenging family dynamics that had been established over decades would require courage I wasn't sure I possessed. But accepting continued exclusion and disrespect felt increasingly impossible as I understood the true scope of how differently my parents treated their 2 daughters. The photographs from their vacation would remain on social media permanently, a lasting record of my exclusion from what they had framed as a meaningful family experience. Every mutual friend who had seen those posts now possessed evidence that I was somehow separate from my family's most important memories, somehow less, deserving of their time and financial investment. But as I thought about their return and the conversations that would inevitably follow, I began to realize that their European vacation had revealed more than just their prioritization of Emma. It had also revealed something about the financial resources they were drawing from to fund such expensive experiences, resources that raised questions I was uniquely qualified to explore. After all, I was an accountant with professional expertise in financial analysis, and I was becoming increasingly curious about exactly how my parents were funding a lifestyle that appeared to exceed their known income sources. Sometimes the most important discoveries come not from what people choose to show you, but from what they accidentally reveal while trying to exclude you from their carefully constructed narrative. Their homecoming was announced with the same fanfare that had characterized their entire European adventure. Emma posted a photo from the airport showing all three of them with exhausted but satisfied expressions, surrounded by an impressive collection of designer luggage that hadn't accompanied them on their departure 2 weeks earlier. The caption read, "Home sweet home after the most incredible family adventure. Missing those European sunsets already, but so grateful for every magical moment. Can't wait to plan our next family escape." I read the post while sitting in my office during lunch break, the familiar sting of exclusion now accompanied by a deeper sense of resolve. The phrase family escape particularly bothered me, suggesting that I was something they needed to escape from rather than someone they wanted to include in their experiences. That evening, my phone finally rang with a call from Mom. I had been expecting some kind of contact since their return, though I wasn't sure whether it would be an explanation, an apology, or simply a casual check-in that pretended nothing unusual had occurred. "Rachel, honey." Mom's voice carried its usual cheerful tone, with no hint of concern or awareness that anything might be amiss. "We're back from our amazing trip. I know we've been out of touch, but the time difference made communication so difficult, and we're just so busy experiencing everything Europe had to offer." The casual nature of her greeting, as if they had simply been temporarily unavailable rather than deliberately excluding me from a major family experience, confirmed that they had no intention of addressing the situation directly. I had learned over the years to recognize this pattern in my parents' communication style. Difficult topics were avoided through cheerful deflection and the assumption that enough time had passed for any hurt feelings to dissipate naturally. "I saw your photos," I replied carefully, testing whether she would acknowledge my exclusion or continue pretending it was normal. "It looked like you had a wonderful time." "Oh, it was absolutely magical. Emma was such a delightful travel companion, and your father really exceeded himself with the planning. He researched every restaurant, every museum, every little detail, to make sure we had the perfect experience. You know how he gets when he's organizing something special." Her description of Dad as the trip planner was new information. Throughout my childhood, Mom had typically been the one who organized family activities and vacations. Dad's involvement in detailed planning suggested this trip had been particularly important to him, significant enough to warrant personal attention to logistics and expenses. It seemed like quite an elaborate vacation, I observed, hoping to prompt some discussion of the financial scope of their adventure. "Much more extensive than your usual travel." "Well, Emma is only going to graduate once with her fashion design degree," Mom replied, her tone taking on a slightly defensive quality. "We wanted to celebrate her achievement with something really special, something she'd remember for the rest of her life. You know how hard she's worked to build her career in such a competitive field." The explanation framed the trip as a graduation celebration, which was the first time I had heard this justification. Emma had completed her fashion design program 8 months earlier, a detail that made their delayed celebration seem somewhat arbitrary. More importantly, when I had completed my accounting degree 4 years ago, followed by my CPA certification 2 years later, neither achievement had been marked with anything approaching a European vacation. I didn't realize it was specifically for Emma's graduation, I said, keeping my tone neutral despite my growing frustration. That wasn't mentioned when you were planning it. There was a brief pause before Mom responded, and I could hear her choosing her words carefully. Well, we weren't sure about the timing for the longest time, and then everything came together so quickly. You seemed so busy with your work projects, and we didn't want to impose on your schedule with something that might not interest you anyway. The implication that European travel might not interest me was particularly insulting, given that I had often mentioned my desire to visit historical sites and museums overseas. During family conversations about travel destinations, I had specifically expressed interest in seeing the Louvre and experiencing French cuisine. Yet Mom was now suggesting that they had excluded me from the trip out of consideration for my presumed lack of interest. I would have been very interested in joining you, I said firmly. I would have made arrangements with work if I had known. You were planning a family vacation. Oh, honey, you're always so responsible about work. We didn't want to put you in the position of having to choose between your professional obligations and family time. We know how important your career is to you. The circular logic of her explanation was maddening. They had excluded me from the trip because they assumed I would prioritize work, then used my exclusion as evidence that I indeed prioritized work over family time. This created a narrative where my absence became proof of my own misplaced priorities, rather than evidence of their deliberate exclusion. Mom, I was never given the opportunity to make that choice, I pointed out. I found out about the trip through Emma's social media posts after you had already left. Another pause. Longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its cheerful confidence. I thought we had mentioned it to you. Maybe it got lost in one of our conversations, or perhaps you were distracted when we brought it up. You know how these things can happen with miscommunication. I recognized this tactic from countless previous interactions. When confronted with behavior that was difficult to justify, Mom would suggest that the problem was actually a failure of memory or communication rather than a deliberate action on their part. This approach allowed her to avoid taking responsibility while implying that I was somehow at fault for misunderstanding or forgetting important information. There was no miscommunication, I said calmly but firmly. You planned and executed a 2-week European vacation without including me in any discussions about it. I learned about it the same way a stranger would have learned about it, through social media posts. The directness of my statement seemed to catch her off guard. Mom was accustomed to my accepting her explanations and moving on from uncomfortable topics, a pattern that had helped maintain family harmony, but had also enabled increasingly problematic behavior over the years. Rachel, I don't understand why you're being so dramatic about this, she said, her tone shifting from defensive to slightly annoyed. It was just a trip. There will be other opportunities for family travel. The dismissive characterization of their European adventure as just a trip was breathtaking in its casual minimization of what had clearly been a significant and expensive family experience. More troubling was her suggestion that future opportunities would somehow compensate for my exclusion from this particular experience, as if family inclusion was something that could be balanced over time rather than something that should be automatic and consistent. It wasn't just a trip to Emma, I replied. Based on her social media posts, it was the most amazing experience of her entire life, a magical family adventure that created memories to last forever. Those were her words, not mine. Mom was quiet for a moment, perhaps recognizing that Emma's own description of the trip contradicted her attempt to minimize its significance. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note of irritation that suggested she was growing tired of explaining what she viewed as a simple situation. Emma is young and dramatic. She gets excited about experiences in ways that perhaps you've outgrown. We thought you'd prefer something more practical, more aligned with your personality and interests. This characterization of me as someone who had outgrown excitement about travel and new experiences was both hurtful and revealing. Mom seemed to view my responsible approach to finances and career as evidence that I no longer desired or deserved special experiences. In her mind, my practical nature disqualified me from consideration for the kind of magical adventures that were appropriate for Emma's more artistic and spontaneous personality. My personality includes appreciation for travel, culture, and family time, I said, struggling to keep frustration out of my voice. My being responsible with money doesn't mean I don't value experiences or that I shouldn't be included in family decisions. Of course it doesn't, Mom replied quickly, but her tone suggested she was simply trying to end the conversation rather than engaging with my actual concerns. Listen, honey, we should get together soon so you can hear all about the trip and see our photos. Emma bought you some beautiful things in Paris that she's excited to give you. The offer of souvenirs as compensation for exclusion from the experience itself felt particularly insulting. Emma had spent my parents' money on gifts for me while enjoying a vacation I had been deliberately excluded from, creating a dynamic where I was expected to be grateful for expensive tokens while accepting my absence from the actual family experience. I'd rather discuss how family travel decisions will be made in the future, I said, realizing that this conversation would be my only opportunity to establish clear expectations about my inclusion in family activities. I want to understand how a 2-week European vacation was planned and executed without any input from me. Rachel, you're making this much more complicated than it needs to be, Mom said, her voice taking on the strained patience tone she used when she felt I was being unreasonably demanding. We're a family. Sometimes plans develop organically, and not every decision requires a committee meeting. Her description of their European vacation as something that developed organically was clearly false, given the elaborate planning and significant expense involved. This was not a spontaneous weekend trip that had evolved naturally from casual conversations. This was a carefully orchestrated international vacation that required months of preparation and substantial financial resources. A family trip for 3 members of a 4-person family should involve some discussion with the 4th member, I replied. Even if that discussion results in my choosing not to participate, I should have been part of the initial conversation. Fine, Mom said, her patience clearly exhausted. In the future, we'll make sure to include you in every family discussion. Will that make you happy? The grudging nature of her agreement, framed as an unreasonable demand I was making rather than a basic expectation of equal treatment, confirmed that she fundamentally didn't understand or accept my perspective on the situation. She was offering compliance with my requests as a favor rather than acknowledging that her behavior had been inappropriate. After we ended the call, I sat in my apartment feeling more isolated than ever. The conversation had clarified that my parents viewed my exclusion from their European vacation as perfectly reasonable, even considerate, given their assessment of my personality and priorities. They had created a narrative that painted their decision as thoughtful family planning, rather than deliberate exclusion, and they expected me to accept this narrative without further complaint. Over the next few days, I received several text messages from Emma with photos from their trip, accompanied by casual commentary about various experiences and locations. Her messages maintained the same tone as Mom's phone call, treating the vacation as something I had naturally not been part of rather than something I had been excluded from. There was no acknowledgement that my absence might have been hurtful or that including me had ever been considered. The photos Emma shared revealed details about their trip that hadn't been visible in their public social media posts. Private dining, experiences that appeared to cost thousands of dollars, shopping excursions where individual purchases exceeded my monthly discretionary spending, hotel accommodations that included personal concierge services and luxury amenities. The scope of their indulgence was even more extensive than I had initially calculated, suggesting a trip budget that approached $40,000. This figure became increasingly important to me as I tried to understand the source of their apparent wealth. $40,000 represented more than half of my annual income, money that had taken me years of careful saving to accumulate. For my parents to spend this amount on a single vacation implied either substantial hidden financial resources or a willingness to take on significant debt for the sake of creating experiences for Emma. I decided to conduct more systematic research into my parents' financial situation, using the professional skills I had developed through my accounting career. This wasn't motivated by curiosity alone. I was beginning to suspect that their spending patterns might indicate financial problems that could eventually affect the entire family, including me. I started by researching recent property transactions in their neighborhood, trying to understand whether they might have refinanced their house or taken out additional loans against its value. Public records showed that they had indeed refinanced twice in the past 5 years, each time accessing substantial amounts of equity that had built up through property appreciation. The total amount of money they had withdrawn from their home equity exceeded $100,000, funds that weren't reflected in any obvious improvements to their property or lifestyle. Next, I investigated their known credit accounts, using resources available to financial professionals for client verification purposes. What I discovered was deeply concerning. They carried balances on multiple credit cards totaling nearly $60,000, debt that had been accumulated over the past 3 years. The minimum payments on this debt would consume a significant portion of their monthly income, leaving little room for the kind of discretionary spending I had observed in Emma's lifestyle and their recent vacation. The financial picture that emerged from my research suggested that my parents had been funding Emma's expensive lifestyle and their own luxury experiences through borrowed money, systematically liquidating their home equity and accumulating card debt to maintain appearances and create experiences that exceeded their actual income capacity. This discovery shifted my perspective on their exclusion of me from family financial discussions and expensive family activities. It wasn't just about favoritism or different treatment of their 2 daughters. It was about hiding a pattern of financial irresponsibility that they knew I, as a professional accountant, would recognize and challenge. My exclusion from the European vacation wasn't just about prioritizing Emma's graduation celebration or assuming I wouldn't be interested in travel. It was about avoiding scrutiny from someone with the expertise to understand the true cost of their decisions and the unsustainability of their spending patterns. Armed with this new understanding, I realized that my parents' financial behavior had implications that extended far beyond my hurt feelings about being excluded from family experiences. If they continued on their current trajectory, they would likely face serious financial difficulties within the next few years, potentially requiring assistance from their adult children or facing bankruptcy and loss of their home. Emma, with her continued dependence on parental financial support and her apparent ignorance about the source of that support, was particularly vulnerable to the eventual collapse of their unsustainable spending. She had built a lifestyle that required ongoing subsidies from parents who were secretly borrowing money to fund her expenses and their own luxury experiences. I also realized that my own financial security could be affected by their decisions. If they continued accumulating debt and liquidating assets, there would be no family resources to pass down to the next generation. More immediately, they might eventually approach me for financial assistance, expecting me to help fund their lifestyle or bail them out of debt they had accumulated while excluding me from the experiences that debt had purchased. The unfairness of this potential scenario was staggering. They had systematically excluded me from family financial discussions and family experiences, while secretly accumulating debt that could eventually become my responsibility to address. They had invested borrowed money in creating memories and experiences for Emma while treating me as separate from the family core, then potentially expecting me to contribute to resolving the financial consequences of those decisions. This realization prompted me to reconsider not just my relationship with my parents, but my entire approach to family obligations and expectations. For years, I had accepted their treatment of me as the responsible, independent daughter who didn't require the same level of attention and support as Emma. I had prided myself on my self-sufficiency and financial stability, viewing these qualities as positive traits that contributed to family harmony. But my parents had interpreted my independence as permission to exclude me from family decision-making and family experiences, while potentially expecting me to contribute to resolving problems created by decisions I had no part in making. My responsible approach to finances had somehow disqualified me from consideration for expensive family experiences, while positioning me as a potential resource for addressing financial problems created by funding those same experiences for Emma. The asymmetry was becoming impossible to ignore or accept. I was expected to maintain family relationships and obligations without receiving equal treatment in family decision-making or equal access to family resources. I was classified as too responsible to deserve special experiences, but potentially responsible enough to help resolve the consequences of providing those experiences to Emma. This understanding led me to a decision that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. I would use my professional expertise and my insider knowledge of their financial situation to establish boundaries that reflected my actual value and importance within the family structure. If they wanted to continue treating me as separate from their core family unit, I would demonstrate exactly what that separation meant in practical terms. The first step would be investigating exactly how much debt they had accumulated and what assets remained accessible to them. The second step would be identifying any family financial arrangements that currently benefited me, arrangements that could be modified to reflect my new understanding of my position within their priorities. As an accountant, I understood that financial relationships often reflected and reinforced family dynamics. Money decisions revealed values and priorities that people might not express directly in conversation. My parents' financial behavior had revealed their true assessment of my worth and importance relative to Emma, information that should guide my own decisions about family obligations and support. I spent the weekend creating a comprehensive analysis of their financial situation, using techniques I employed for clients who needed to understand their complete fiscal picture. The results were even more troubling than my initial research had suggested. Their total debt, including mortgages, home equity loans, and credit cards, now exceeded the value of their assets. They were technically insolvent, kept afloat only by minimum payments that consumed nearly all their available income. Yet their spending continued without apparent concern for these underlying financial realities. Emma's monthly expenses, which I estimated based on her social media posts and lifestyle choices, exceeded Dad's take-home pay. Their European vacation had been charged to credit cards that were already near their limits. They appeared to be funding their current lifestyle entirely through borrowed money, with no plan for repayment beyond accessing additional credit as needed. This pattern could continue only until lenders stopped extending additional credit or until they reached the maximum equity available in their home. Based on current trends, I estimated they had perhaps 18 months before facing a financial crisis that would force dramatic lifestyle changes or bankruptcy. Emma appeared to have no awareness of this impending crisis. Her social media posts continued to showcase expensive purchases and experiences, suggesting ongoing confidence in her parents' ability to fund her lifestyle indefinitely. She had never been required to develop financial independence or awareness of the true cost of her choices, leaving her completely unprepared for the eventual collapse of her parents' ability to support her. Meanwhile, I had been excluded from family experiences and discussions precisely because my financial expertise would have revealed the unsustainability of their decisions. They had chosen to hide their fiscal irresponsibility rather than modify their spending patterns, prioritizing short-term gratification and Emma's happiness over long-term financial stability. This analysis led me to examine my own financial arrangements with my parents, looking for any benefits or support that I might be receiving without full awareness. What I discovered was both surprising and significant. 3 years earlier, they had added me as an authorized user on a premium credit card account, explaining that it would help improve my credit score and provide emergency access to funds if needed. I had never used this card and had largely forgotten about its existence. viewing it as a minor family convenience rather than something of significant value. But researching the account details revealed that it was connected to an elite travel rewards program that provided benefits I had never realized I possessed. These benefits included access to exclusive airport lounges, priority booking privileges at luxury hotels and resorts, and most significantly, a complimentary membership to one of the most exclusive vacation resort networks in the country. The two resort membership alone was valued at over $15,000 annually, a benefit that had been automatically renewed each year through the credit card's premium services. This membership provided access to luxury vacation properties in destinations worldwide, properties that typically cost thousands of dollars per night, but were available to members at significantly reduced rates or sometimes without additional fees beyond the membership cost. I had never used these benefits because I had never been informed they existed. My parents had added me to the account but had never explained the full scope of privileges that came with it. Yet they were clearly aware of these benefits, as evidenced by charges on the account for resort stays and luxury travel that I now realized represented their own vacation experiences over the past several years. They had been using my authorized user status to access premium travel benefits while simultaneously excluding me from the family travel experiences those benefits made possible. The European vacation, I discovered, had been partially funded through travel rewards accumulated on the account that bore my name alongside theirs. This discovery revealed a new dimension to their financial deception. They hadn't just excluded me from family experiences. They had used my creditworthiness and my inclusion on their premium accounts to access benefits that enhanced their own travel experiences, while keeping me unaware that such benefits existed. The irony was striking. My responsible credit history and financial stability had made me an attractive addition to their premium credit accounts, improving the benefits available to the entire family. Yet these enhanced benefits had been used exclusively for Emma's experiences and their own luxury travel, while I remained unaware that I had any claim to such privileges. This situation presented an opportunity to establish boundaries that reflected my new understanding of family dynamics. If my parents wanted to continue treating me as separate from their core family unit, I could demonstrate the practical consequences of that separation by removing my financial support from arrangements that currently benefited them. As an authorized user on their premium credit card account, I had the ability to request removal of my access, a change that would also eliminate their access to the enhanced benefits my inclusion had provided. The exclusive resort membership that had enabled their luxury vacation experiences would be terminated, along with other premium travel privileges that relied on my participation in their account structure. More significantly, my removal from their credit accounts would likely reduce their overall credit limits and available benefits, potentially limiting their ability to continue funding their unsustainable lifestyle through borrowed money. Credit card companies often extended higher limits and better benefits to accounts with multiple users who demonstrated strong financial profiles. My profile had been contributing to their access to credit that was being used to fund experiences I was excluded from. The prospect of taking this action felt both empowering and terrifying. It would be the first time I had ever used financial leverage to address family relationship issues, a step that felt potentially irreversible in its implications for our long-term dynamics. Yet the current situation was already unsustainable, both financially and emotionally. My parents had demonstrated that they viewed my financial stability and responsible credit history as resources to be utilized while treating my desire for inclusion in family experiences as something that could be safely ignored. They had created a system where my financial contributions enhanced their lifestyle while my emotional needs were minimized or dismissed entirely. Removing my support from their financial arrangements wouldn't harm their ability to fund Emma's basic needs or their own essential expenses, but it would eliminate their access to the luxury travel benefits that had enabled experiences like their European vacation, forcing them to confront the true cost of their spending patterns and the unsustainability of Emma's current lifestyle. The decision would also send a clear message about my expectations for family relationships going forward. If they wanted access to my financial stability and creditworthiness, they would need to treat me as an equal member of the family, included in major decisions and experiences, rather than excluded while my resources were quietly utilized to enhance their lifestyle. As I prepared to make this decision, I realized that the European vacation had been a catalyst for understanding family dynamics that had been problematic for years. Their exclusion of me from this experience had prompted investigation that revealed the broader pattern of using my resources while minimizing my importance, a pattern that would have continued indefinitely if not for their overreach in planning such an expensive and visible family experience without including me. Sometimes the most important family boundaries are established not through conversation and negotiation, but through actions that demonstrate the practical consequences of treating family members as separate and unequal. My parents were about to discover exactly what separation from my financial stability actually meant for their ability to maintain their current lifestyle and continue funding Emma's expensive experiences. The power dynamic in our family was about to shift dramatically, and for the first time in years, that shift would favor honesty, equality, and authentic respect over performance, deception, and taking advantage of the responsible daughter who had been too generous with her resources and too accepting of unequal treatment. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that seemed to mirror my newfound resolve. I had spent the weekend finalizing my research and preparing for what would be the most decisive action I had ever taken regarding my family relationships. The evidence was overwhelming, the justification was sound, and my course of action was clear. I arrived at my office early, wanting to handle the necessary phone calls before my colleagues arrived and the normal workday distractions began. The first call was to the credit card company's customer service line, where I requested detailed information about the premium account I was listed on as an authorized user. The customer service representative, professional and efficient, confirmed what my research had already revealed. The account included an exclusive resort membership valued at $18,000 annually, airport lounge access worldwide, concierge services, and enhanced travel booking privileges. More importantly, she explained that these premium benefits were tied directly to having multiple authorized users with excellent credit profiles on the account. If you were to remove yourself as an authorized user, she explained, the primary account holder would lose access to several of these benefits, particularly the resort membership and the enhanced credit limit that your profile helps qualify. The account for. I requested the necessary forms to remove myself from the account, which she promised to email within the hour. The process would take 5 to 7 business days to complete, during which time I would retain access to the account, but the primary holders would be notified of my pending removal. The second call was to the exclusive resort network directly. I wanted to understand exactly what my parents would lose when my removal from the credit card account terminated their membership. The representative I spoke with was knowledgeable about their membership benefits and confirmed that they had used their privileges extensively over the past 3 years. The membership holder has reserved properties in Aspen, Napa Valley, and the Bahamas within the past 18 months, she informed me. They've also made advance reservations for a property in Hawaii for this Christmas season. That reservation would be canceled if the membership were to lapse. The information about advance reservations was particularly revealing. My parents had already planned another expensive family vacation for the holidays, apparently assuming their access to luxury resort properties would continue indefinitely. They had no idea that their ability to afford such experiences depended entirely on benefits derived from my participation in their credit arrangements. By noon, I had completed all the necessary paperwork to remove myself from their credit accounts, and had received confirmation that the process had been initiated. Within a week, their access to premium travel benefits would be eliminated, their credit limits would be reduced, and their planned Christmas vacation would be automatically canceled. I felt a mixture of empowerment and nervousness as I realized the magnitude of what I had set in motion. This wasn't just about removing myself from credit accounts. It was about fundamentally changing the family power dynamic and forcing a reckoning. with financial realities they had been avoiding through borrowed money and borrowed benefits. That evening, I decided to have dinner with Grandma Rose. I wanted to share my discoveries with someone who could provide perspective on the family situation without being emotionally invested in protecting the existing dynamics. Grandma Rose had always been refreshingly direct in her assessments of family behavior, and I trusted her judgment about whether my actions were proportionate to the situation. We met at her favorite restaurant, a modest Italian place where she had been a regular customer for over 20 years. The familiar setting seemed appropriate for a conversation about family honesty and authentic relationships, values that Grandma Rose had always embodied more consistently than her own children. "You look different," she observed as soon as I sat down across from her. "More settled somehow, like you've made an important decision?" I explained what I had discovered about my parents' financial situation, their use of my credit profile to access benefits, and the action I had taken that morning to remove myself from their accounts. Grandma Rose listened intently, asking occasional questions for clarification, but mostly allowing me to share the full scope of what I had learned. "So they've been using your good credit to fund Emma's lifestyle and their own expensive vacations," she summarized when I finished, "while simultaneously excluding you from the experiences your financial participation made possible." "Exactly. And they've accumulated substantial debt doing it, debt that will become a serious problem within the next year or two if they don't change their spending patterns." Grandma Rose was quiet for several minutes, considering the implications of what I had shared. When she spoke again, her voice carried the thoughtful tone she used when addressing serious family issues. "Your mother has always had a complicated relationship with money," she said. "Even as a child, she wanted things that were beyond what your grandfather and I could provide. She seemed to believe that having expensive things would somehow change how people saw her, make her more important or more valuable." This insight into Mom's childhood psychology helped explain some of her current behavior, particularly her willingness to go into debt to fund experiences and purchases that created an appearance of wealth and success. "But what bothers me most," Grandma Rose continued, "is how they've treated you in all of this. Using your financial stability while excluding you from family experiences isn't just wrong, it's cruel. You deserve better from people who claim to love you." Her validation of my perspective was both comforting and reinforcing. I had worried that my actions might seem petty or vindictive to someone with more life experience, but Grandma Rose clearly understood the deeper issues at stake. "What do you think will happen when they realize what I've done?" I asked. "Initially, they'll probably be angry and defensive," she replied honestly. "People don't like having their behavior exposed, especially when that behavior has been financially irresponsible. But eventually, they'll have to face the reality of their situation, and that might actually be the best thing for everyone involved, including Emma." We spent the rest of dinner discussing potential scenarios for how my family might respond to losing their access to luxury travel benefits and facing the true cost of their lifestyle choices. Grandma Rose's perspective was that financial accountability was long overdue and that my action might force the kind of honest family conversations that should have happened years earlier. 3 days later, the first consequences of my decision became apparent. Emma called me in tears, her usual confidence replaced by confusion and distress. "Rachel, something horrible has happened," she said, her voice shaking. "Mom and Dad's Christmas vacation to Hawaii was just canceled. The resort says they're no longer eligible for the membership benefits, and they can't afford to pay the regular rates. They're devastated, and they don't understand what went wrong." I felt a pang of sympathy for Emma's distress, even as I recognized that she was experiencing the natural consequences of financial arrangements she had never bothered to understand. Her tears were real, her confusion was genuine, but her upset was based on expectations that had been unrealistic from the beginning. Did they explain how they were able to afford luxury resort vacations in the first place? I asked gently. They said they had some kind of special membership through Dad's credit card, but apparently something changed with the account and they lost access. Mom is talking about taking out another loan against the house to pay for a different vacation, but Dad seems really stressed about money all of a sudden. Emma's description of their differing responses to this financial setback was telling. Mom's immediate solution was to borrow more money, continuing the pattern that had created their current debt problem. Dad's stress suggested he was beginning to understand the unsustainability of their spending, perhaps for the first time fully grasping how precarious their financial situation had become. Emma, how much do you know about Mom and Dad's actual financial situation? I asked, curious whether she had any awareness of the debt they had accumulated funding her lifestyle. I don't really think about their finances, she admitted. They've always been generous with me, and I assumed they could afford whatever they chose to spend money on. Is there something wrong? Are they having financial problems? Her innocence about money matters was both touching and problematic. At 24, Emma had never been required to consider the source of her parents' generosity or the sustainability of her own lifestyle. She had been protected from financial realities in ways that had prevented her from developing adult awareness of economic consequences. I think they may have been overspending for several years, I said carefully. The luxury vacations and your monthly expenses probably exceed their actual income by a significant amount. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing information that challenged fundamental assumptions about her family's financial stability. When she spoke again, her voice was small and uncertain. Do you think that's why you weren't invited on the Europe trip? Because they couldn't actually afford to take 4 people? Her question revealed a level of insight I hadn't expected. Despite her general lack of financial awareness, Emma was intelligent enough to recognize that excluding me from expensive family experiences might have had practical rather than personal motivations. I think they excluded me because they knew I would recognize that they couldn't afford the trip for anyone, I replied. As an accountant, I would have asked questions about how they were funding such expensive experiences. Oh my God, Emma whispered, the full implications of this revelation apparently dawning on her. They've been hiding money problems from both of us. But if they can't afford these things, how have they been paying for my apartment and my credit cards and everything else? The conversation that followed was one of the most honest discussions Emma and I had ever had about family dynamics and financial realities. For the first time, she began to understand that her lifestyle had been funded through borrowed money, and that her parents' apparent wealth was actually debt that would eventually require repayment. She also began to understand why I had been excluded from family financial discussions and expensive family experiences. My professional expertise would have exposed the unsustainability of their choices, potentially requiring lifestyle changes that would have affected her comfort and Emma's access to luxury experiences. I feel terrible, she said finally. I've been living this amazing life while they went into debt, and meanwhile they were excluding you from family things because you would have made them face reality. That's so unfair to you. Her recognition of the injustice was gratifying, but more importantly, it suggested that Emma was capable of developing the kind of financial awareness and family insight that had been stunted by years of protection from economic consequences. 2 days later, I received a phone call from Dad. His voice was tense and formal, carrying none of the casual warmth that typically characterized our conversations. The change in his tone immediately confirmed that they had discovered my role in their loss of premium credit benefits. Rachel, we need to talk, he said without preamble. Your mother and I have learned that you removed yourself from our credit card account, and we're trying to understand why you would take such a drastic step without discussing it with us first. His framing of my action as drastic and his expectation that I should have consulted them before removing myself from their account revealed how completely he had taken my financial participation for granted. In his mind, My creditworthiness was a family resource that he expected to continue accessing regardless of how they treated me within the family dynamic. I removed myself because I discovered that my participation in your account was providing benefits that you were using while excluding me from family experiences, I replied calmly. It seemed inappropriate for me to continue supporting arrangements that I wasn't benefiting from. Those account benefits weren't just for us, Dad protested. They were family benefits available to everyone on the account, including you. But I was never told about their existence, I pointed out. You used my credit profile to access luxury travel benefits while simultaneously excluding me from the family travel experiences those benefits made possible. There was a long pause before Dad responded, and I could hear him struggling to formulate a defense of their behavior that would justify their expectations of continued access to my financial support. The Europe trip was a special circumstance, he said finally. We wanted to celebrate Emma's graduation with something memorable, and we thought you'd prefer not to be included in that kind of family-focused experience. His explanation revealed the fundamental problem with their thinking. They had convinced themselves that excluding me from family experiences was actually considerate, based on their assessment of my personality and preferences. This allowed them to avoid acknowledging that their exclusion was motivated by their desire to avoid financial scrutiny rather than genuine concern for my comfort. Dad, I would have preferred to be included in discussions about family travel plans, I said firmly. Even if I had chosen not to participate, I should have been part of the initial conversation about family experiences and how they would be funded. We didn't think you'd be interested in discussing vacation planning, he replied, but his voice carried less conviction than before. You've always been focused on practical matters rather than leisure activities. I'm focused on practical matters like understanding how a family with your known income sources can afford $40,000 vacations and support Emma's lifestyle while accumulating substantial debt, I said directly. The silence that followed. This statement was profound. Dad clearly hadn't expected me to have researched their financial situation so thoroughly, and my knowledge of the scope of their debt eliminated his ability to continue pretending that their spending was within reasonable limits. How do you know about our debt? He asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm an accountant, Dad. Financial research is part of my professional expertise. When I saw the scope of your European vacation expenses, I became concerned about the sustainability of your spending patterns. What followed was the most honest conversation I had ever had with my father about money and family dynamics. For the first time, he acknowledged that they had been funding their lifestyle and Emma's expenses through borrowed money, that they had excluded me from financial discussions because they knew I would recognize the problems with their approach, and that they had taken my financial support for granted while treating me as separate from their core family unit. He also admitted that losing access to the premium credit benefits had forced him to confront the reality of their financial situation for the first time in years. Without the enhanced credit limits and luxury travel benefits, they could no longer maintain the illusion that their lifestyle was sustainable or that Emma's expenses were manageable within their actual income. I don't know how to fix this, he said, his voice carrying a defeat I had never heard from him before. We owe more money than we can realistically repay. Emma doesn't understand that her lifestyle has to change, and your mother is talking about borrowing even more money to maintain our commitments. For the first time in our relationship, my father was asking for my help not as a financial resource to be utilized, but as a professional with expertise that could guide them towards sustainable solutions. The role reversal was dramatic and, frankly, long overdue. Over the following weeks, I worked with my parents to develop a realistic assessment of their financial situation and a plan for addressing their debt without declaring bankruptcy. The process required brutal honesty about their spending patterns, Emma's lifestyle costs, and the necessity of making significant changes to avoid financial catastrophe. Emma, to her credit, responded to this new financial reality with more maturity than I had expected. She moved to a smaller apartment, took a full-time position with a fashion marketing firm, and began contributing to her own expenses for the first time in years. The adjustment was difficult for her, but she gradually developed financial awareness and independence that had been prevented by years of parental subsidies. Mom had the most difficulty accepting the new reality. She continued to propose solutions that involved borrowing additional money or finding ways to maintain their previous lifestyle through creative financing. It took several months and the direct intervention of a debt counselor before she began to understand that their financial problems required spending less money, not finding new sources of borrowed funds. The transformation of our family dynamics was gradual but profound. For the first time in years, family conversations included honest discussion of financial realities and mutual respect for each family member's perspectives and expertise. My professional knowledge was valued rather than avoided. Emma's creative talents were channeled towards sustainable career development rather than expensive lifestyle choices. And family experiences were planned within realistic budgets that included everyone. 6 months after I canceled their resort membership, we took our first family vacation together in over 5 years. It was a modest camping trip to a national park, funded entirely through savings rather than borrowed money. The experience was more authentic and enjoyable than any of their previous luxury vacations had appeared to be, precisely because it was based on honest financial planning rather than debt-funded appearances. The camping trip also marked the first time my parents acknowledged directly that their previous approach to family relationships and financial management had been fundamentally flawed. They apologized for excluding me from family experiences, for taking advantage of my financial stability, and for prioritizing Emma's immediate gratification over long-term family health and equality. More importantly, they demonstrated their commitment to change through actions rather than just words. Family decisions now included input from all family members. Financial discussions were transparent rather than secretive, and family experiences were planned based on genuine affordability rather than borrowed money. The most significant change was in my own relationship with family obligations and expectations. I no longer accepted unequal treatment in the name of family harmony, and I no longer provided financial support without receiving equal respect and inclusion in return. The boundaries I had established through removing myself from their credit accounts had evolved into permanent changes in how we related to each other as adults. Emma and I developed a much closer relationship once the artificial competition for parental resources was eliminated. Without the constant dynamic of her receiving special treatment while I was excluded from family experiences, we were able to build a friendship based on mutual respect rather than resentment and confusion. About our different roles within the family, looking back, I realized that their European vacation had been the catalyst for transformation that was long overdue. Their decision to exclude me from such a significant family experience had finally forced me to examine and challenge family dynamics that had been problematic for years. My discovery of their financial deception and my decision to remove my support from their unsustainable lifestyle had created the crisis necessary for genuine change. Sometimes the most important family boundaries are established not through conversation and compromise, but through actions that demonstrate the real consequences of treating family members as unequal or expendable. My parents had learned that excluding me from family experiences meant losing access to my financial stability and professional expertise. Emma had learned that lifestyle choices have costs that must eventually be paid. And I had learned that demanding equal treatment and respect was not only possible but necessary for authentic family relationships. The family that emerged from this crisis was smaller in terms of financial resources, but larger in terms of genuine connection and mutual respect. We no longer had access to luxury resort memberships or expensive European vacations, but we had something more valuable: relationships based on honesty, equality, and authentic care for each other's well-being rather than performance and financial manipulation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.